I set the groceries down on the scorching concrete, sweat stinging my eyes as the lock clicked shut. From inside, my son's voice slurred through the doorframe. "Beg me back in, old woman." Beginning, after carrying him through sickness, after decades of holding this family together, I was shut out of the very house I built. But that night, I made a vow. If he thought locks could break me, he would learn just how many I could change. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The sun beat down on the stucco walls of the Doyle home, the late afternoon heat rising in waves off the driveway. Maggie Doyle shifted the grocery bags in her arms, the plastic handles biting into her palms. Her breath came short and dry in the desert air, and sweat gathered at her brow, stinging her eyes. She was 71, but she carried herself with a straight-backed pride. After decades as a postal worker, the weight of bags was nothing new to her. What pressed heavier was the silence that followed as she reached her front porch. The door that had always opened for her own door, did not. From inside came the metallic scrape of a deadbolt sliding into place. Maggie froze, listening. It wasn't an accident. The lock turned slow, deliberate, and final, as if mocking her with each mechanical click. Her jaw tightened. When the door cracked open just an inch, her son David filled the gap, eyes glassy with drink. The smirk on his lips was crueler than the desert sun. "Beg me back in, old woman," he drawled, his voice slurred but sharp. He pushed the door closed again and twisted the lock with theatrical flair. The laughter that followed was Sharon's, light, mocking, drifting from deeper in the hallway. "She'll beg," Sharon chimed, her voice like sandpaper dragged across smooth stone. Maggie's chest tightened, not from weakness but from the insult of it. She turned her head slightly and caught movement above. In the second-story window, Emily stood motionless, half hidden by the curtains. Her granddaughter's face was pale, her eyes wide, and her mouth pressed into a guilty line. She didn't laugh. She didn't cheer. She only watched, as though she wished she could vanish behind the glass. Maggie adjusted the weight of the groceries. Apples rolled against a loaf of bread, and the gallon of milk sweated condensation onto her dress. She did not speak. David cracked the door again, just enough to lean his shoulder into the frame. "You hearing me? You want your house back. You knock like a stray dog." His grin widened, and Sharon's laughter rang louder behind him, egging him on. The sound echoed through the cool hallway Maggie could not enter, each note a reminder of what was being stolen from her. The heat pressed harder against her skin. The bags cut deeper into her hands. She looked at her son, not the boy she once tucked into bed, but the man who now treated her dignity like a game. Her lips thinned into a hard line. David's eyes narrowed, expecting a flinch, a plea, some quiver in her stance. He got nothing. The silence unsettled him. "What's the matter, Ma? Cat got your tongue." He chuckled, leaning heavier on the door as if he owned it, as if her very home had already transferred into his possession. From the window, Emily's hand lifted slightly, pressing against the glass, a silent apology. Her eyes shimmered, not with laughter, but with shame. Maggie inhaled slowly. The air was heavy with the smell of dust and sunburnt concrete. Behind the door, Sharon muttered something low, too muffled to catch, but her laughter followed again, shriller this time. David chuckled with her, proud of his cruel trick. The groceries sagged. A can of beans shifted, threatening to tear through the thin plastic. Maggie knelt, setting the bags gently onto the baking concrete. Her knees ached, but her back remained straight. Her silence stretched long enough that even Sharon's laughter faltered, curious. David rattled the lock once more, as though to remind her of her place. "Say the word, Ma." "Just say please. That's all it takes." Maggie raised her eyes to the door, her face unreadable. Sweat streaked the edge of her jaw, but her gaze held steady. A desert horizon, endless, immovable. Her son waited for the crack, the crumble, the surrender. Instead, she leaned close enough for her words to carry through the doorframe, her voice low but steady, sharpened by decades of swallowed storms. Not today. The bags sat abandoned at her feet, heat already seeping into their contents. Milk would sour, vegetables would wilt, bread would harden. But Maggie Doyle did not look back at them. She turned from the locked door, leaving the groceries where they lay, and walked down the driveway as if each step drove a stake of resolve deeper into the desert ground. And behind the door, for the first time that evening, David fell silent. The desert heat clung to Maggie like a second skin as she descended her own driveway. Each step felt measured, deliberate, as though she were pressing her will into the blistering concrete. Behind her, the house stood silent, its locked door like a sneer carved into stucco. She didn't turn back. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her plead or bang her fists against the door. The groceries remained where she'd set them, abandoned on the porch in the scorching Arizona sun. A carton of eggs sweated against the rough concrete, their shells already fragile from the heat. The gallon of milk was a ticking clock, the sourness inevitable. Bread slumped in its plastic wrap, its shape collapsing. To anyone else, it was food wasted. To Maggie, it was a declaration. They could rot. She would not. At the end of the driveway, a battered white van idled at the curb. Its side bore faded lettering, Calder lock and key. A man in his 60s leaned against the hood, cap pulled low, watching her with a squint that was more curiosity than judgment. Trouble? His voice carried easily across the still air, deep and gruff, like gravel sliding in a bucket. Maggie stopped. The weight of the moment caught up to her, the sting in her hands where the plastic had cut, the sweat at the base of her neck, the quiet humiliation pressing like a bruise beneath her ribs. She shook her head once, her chin held high. Not the kind you think. The locksmith studied her for a beat longer, then nodded slowly, as though giving her space to decide how, much truth to spill. Maggie took a breath, her throat dry, and asked the only question that mattered. How fast can you change locks? A flicker of interest crossed his weathered face. Overnight, if you're serious. Her eyes didn't waver. I'm serious. He pushed off the van, wiping his palms on his jeans. Name's Frank. You say the word, I'll bring the tools. His tone was simple, almost casual, but Maggie felt a small surge of steadiness in it, like the grip of a handrail when the steps grow too steep. Behind her, laughter rang faintly through the sealed windows, David's low rumble, Sharon's shrill accompaniment. It carried across the yard like the sound of a door slamming shut on years of sacrifice. Maggie didn't flinch. She only squared her shoulders and walked on, her sandals scuffing the driveway dust. From the upstairs window, Emily's pale face appeared again, but this time, instead of watching silently, she lifted her phone and tilted it out of sight. A vibration buzzed against Maggie's hip a moment later. She pulled her cell from her pocket, the cracked screen glowing with a new message. I'm sorry, Grandma. Just 3 words, but they landed heavier than all of David's laughter. Maggie's throat tightened. She didn't respond, not yet. Silence was her strongest weapon now, even with the one person she still loved inside those walls. Frank's van door creaked as he slid it open, pulling out a clipboard, tapping his pen against the paper. He didn't press her for details. Instead, he said, You'll need the deed. Proof it's your place. Otherwise, locks won't mean much. His words sparked something in her chest, an old, nearly forgotten spark of foresight. She had that proof, not tucked in a bank vault or a lawyer's office, but in the place only she had thought to keep it. An aging manila folder, buried deep in the bottom drawer of her desk. Her hand moved to her tote bag instinctively, brushing against the familiar edge of paper within. She had brought it with her earlier that day, not for David's sake, not out of paranoia, but out of habit. Years of postal routes had trained her to prepare for storms before clouds gathered. As she slipped the folder partway into view, the faded ink of her name on the deed peeked through the plastic sleeve. The paper was yellowed, but her ownership was written in law as firm as desert rock. She felt the heat of it through the plastic, not just property, but power. Something David hadn't counted on. Frank noticed the folder and raised an eyebrow, saying nothing. The desert wind carried the faintest smell of overripe fruit from the groceries baking on the porch behind her. Maggie didn't turn back. She had already left them to their fate. She gripped the folder tighter and looked toward the horizon, her voice low, almost to herself, but certain. Now let's see who really holds the key. The kitchen smelled faintly of brewed coffee and lemon cleaner, a comforting shield against the scorching Tucson evening. Maggie sat at the worn oak table in her neighbor Rhonda's house, the same table where neighborhood gossip was exchanged. Pies were sliced, and grandchildren scribbled homework. Tonight it became something else entirely, a war desk. She slid the manila folder across the table, her fingertips brushing the edges as if touching a lifeline. With careful hands, she opened it and drew out the old property deed. The paper, stiff and slightly yellowed, bore her name in bold print, Margaret Doyle. Her pulse slowed, steadying as her eyes traced the letters. The ink might have faded, but ownership did not fade. She smoothed the document flat, palms pressing down like she was anchoring herself to truth. For years she had lived as if her home was simply her shelter, her quiet space. Now she saw it as something else, territory under siege. Her flip phone buzzed against the tabletop. She picked it up, squinting at the screen before pressing the green button. Laura Briggs, Estate Law, came the crisp voice on the other end. Laura, it's Maggie Doyle. Her voice was measured, but there was steel under it. I've got the deed in front of me. There was a brief pause, then a satisfied hum. Good. That's your leverage. Don't wait, Maggie. A deed is stronger than any key. If they're trying to box you out, you hold the paper that makes every lock they turn meaningless. Maggie glanced toward the kitchen window, where Rhonda's desert roses leaned against the glass, their petals wilting in the heat. He locked me out of my own house tonight, she said quietly, told me to beg. The silence on the other end was sharp. Then Laura's tone shifted, lower, precise. Then you don't just push back. You erase his foothold. You lock him out of everything, house, money, inheritance. We can draw papers tomorrow. Maggie's lips pressed into a thin, determined line. Then that's what we'll do. From the living room, Rhonda called out, You need anything, hun? Her voice was kind, but Maggie shook her head silently, not wanting to break the gravity of the moment. Another buzz sounded, this one from her cell phone. She flipped it open to see a new text. I'm sorry, Grandma. Emily again. Maggie's chest tightened, but she tucked the phone away. Apologies would have to wait. Proof came first. A firm knock at the side door made her jump slightly. Frank Calder leaned in, still smelling faintly of machine oil and desert dust, his cap pushed back on his thinning hair. He nodded toward the table. So you found it. Maggie gestured at the deed, her fingers still resting on the page. It's mine, Frank. Always has been. He gave a short grunt, half approval, half warning. That piece of paper's your sword. I'll have your locks ready tomorrow. Deadbolts, reinforced. He won't like it, but that's not your problem. Something flickered across Maggie's face, not quite a smile, more a recognition. He thinks doors are his weapon. But I've got this. She tapped the deed with a steady nail. Frank set a heavy hand on the back of a chair, leaning close. Just remember, men like him don't stop when you push back. They double down. You ready for that? Her eyes lifted to his. I carried mail through flash floods and rattlesnake country. I've buried a husband and raised a boy who turned sour. Ready doesn't scare me. The room fell still, just the hum of the old refrigerator filling the silence. Maggie gathered the papers back into the folder, her motions precise, as if every crease sealed her intent. Then, faintly, through Rhonda's open window, voices drifted from across the desert air. David's voice, loud, smug, distorted by drink. "She won't last the year, Sharon. The house is mine. Just a matter of time." The words struck like a nail through her chest. Sharon's laugh trailed after his, shrill and triumphant. Maggie tightened her grip on the folder until her knuckles whitened. Her son thought she was already halfway gone, but he was about to learn just how alive she still was. Morning light filtered through Laura Briggs's office blinds, slicing the polished wood desk into neat stripes. Maggie sat straight in the leather chair, the manila folder resting on her lap like a shield. Across from her, Laura tapped a pen against a legal pad, her gaze sharp behind rimless glasses. The hum of the air conditioning filled the silence, but Maggie's mind was already racing ahead. Laura leaned forward. "We're going to break this into steps." Locks changed, bank accounts secured, and the will, rewritten, airtight. She ticked each item off on her fingers, her tone calm but clipped, as if she were outlining a battle plan rather than estate planning. Maggie nodded once. "He wanted to lock me out. Then I'll lock him out of everything." Laura's pen stilled. She studied Maggie's lined face, the set of her jaw. "That's not just strategy. That's resolve. If you mean it, we move fast." The door creaked open and Emily slipped in, shoulders tense, her backpack slung carelessly over one arm. She glanced around the office before closing the door quickly behind her. "Dad doesn't know I'm here," she said, her voice low. "I thought you'd want these." She pulled a bundle of folded papers from the backpack and set them on the desk. Laura unfolded the top sheet. Credit card statements, thousands in liquor stores, casinos, and payday loan withdrawals. Receipts for pawn shops. Gas station charges 3 times in a single day. Emily looked at her grandmother, shame flickering across her young face. "He says it's just bills." "But it's not. I've seen the bottles. The cash. He lies to Mom, too." Maggie reached across and placed her hand gently over Emily's, squeezing once. No words were needed. The gesture said everything. "You've done the right thing." Laura spread the receipts across the desk like puzzle pieces. "This isn't just reckless, it's damning. If he ever tries to claim you're unfit, these prove the opposite. He's bleeding himself dry, and if he thinks your assets will save him, he's wrong." The weight in Maggie's chest eased just slightly. For once she wasn't the one fighting alone. Hours later, back at the house, Sharon's voice carried from the living room, dripping venom in its sweetness. Maggie had returned quietly, folder hidden beneath her arm, the documents Laura had drawn up still unsigned. She paused in the hallway, listening. "You think you're tough now," Sharon whispered loudly enough to carry. "But soon you'll be in a nursing home, and this place will be ours." "Don't get comfortable." Maggie's hand slipped into her cardigan pocket and closed around the small recorder Frank had insisted she carry. She pressed the button, the faint click lost beneath Sharon's laughter. Each syllable burned into tape, undeniable, permanent. From the kitchen doorway, Maggie let the silence answer, her stare flat and unblinking. Sharon smirked, twisting her wedding ring around her finger, mistaking Maggie's quiet for defeat. Later that evening, Frank arrived, toolbox clanking at his side, the smell of oil and metal trailing him. He leaned against the porch rail while Maggie replayed Sharon's words for him. The hiss of tape filled the night air, followed by Sharon's voice sneering about nursing homes. Frank exhaled through his teeth. "Every word," he muttered, shaking his head, "is a nail in their coffin." He snapped his toolbox shut. "Locks tomorrow, strong ones, and cameras. They won't touch a damn door without you knowing." The desert night pressed in close, cicadas buzzing in the mesquite trees. Maggie looked toward her darkened home, every shadow a reminder of betrayal. Yet her grip on the folder never faltered. The following morning, she returned to Laura's office. Papers lay waiting, neatly stacked beside a fountain pen. Her name was printed across the top of every page. Ownership, authority, final say. Laura gestured to the pen. "Once you sign, it's done. David and Sharon are out." Permanently, Maggie's hand hovered over the page. For years she had carried her son through his failures, his debts, his sharp words. Now, with one stroke of ink, she would cut him off completely. Her heart drummed steady as she pressed the pen to paper. The scratch of ink against parchment filled the silence, final as a lock sliding into place. The air in Laura Briggs's office was cool and steady, but Maggie's pulse ran hot. The heavy blinds muted the desert light, casting stripes of gold across the polished desk. Laura had stacked the documents neatly, each page clipped, each clause highlighted in yellow. Everything smelled faintly of toner and lemon polish, but beneath that, Maggie caught the sharper scent of resolve, her own. Laura pushed the first set of papers across the desk, her voice crisp. "This is your new will. Clean. Final. Once signed, it overrides everything before it." She paused, tapping a manicured finger against David's name, then drawing a red slash through it. No David, no Sharon, no chance for them to claw back what isn't theirs. Maggie's throat tightened, but her hands didn't shake. She picked up the pen Laura offered, its weight solid, cool metal resting between her fingers. Her eyes scanned the text, line after line, all legal precision and unforgiving language. She almost smiled at the thought. How strange it was that the law could feel like armor, Laura went on. Primary beneficiary, Emily Doyle. But not a free pass. We've structured it so she receives it if she pursues higher education, college, trade, doesn't matter. She invests in herself. She gets the house and assets. That keeps it safe from her father's reach. Maggie nodded slowly. Emily's face rose in her mind. Tired, ashamed, but still hopeful. She deserves a chance her father squandered. "There's more," Laura said, sliding another document forward. "You requested a secondary donation. 10% of your estate to the Tucson Senior Advocacy Center. I drafted the clause. It's not just a gift. It's a message." Maggie's lips curved faintly. "Good. Let them know someone fought back." Laura leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "And this," she held up the final page, "is your no contest clause. If David or Sharon try to challenge this, they forfeit everything. They can waste money on lawyers, but it won't get them a dime." The sound of the air conditioner hummed louder in the quiet. Maggie stared at her name printed at the bottom of the page. For decades, she had been mother first, protector, provider, even when it meant shielding David from his own bad choices. Signing this was something else entirely. It was a cutting away, a mother erasing her son from her future. Her chest rose slowly. She set the pen to paper. With each stroke, the ink whispered across the page, like locks turning, bolts sliding into place. Maggie Doyle. She pressed firmly, leaving no room for doubt. Laura gathered the signed pages with a precise snap of the folder. "It's done." Maggie exhaled, her voice low, almost reverent. Now the real locks turn. The silence that followed was not empty. It was weighted, final, a door closing for good. That night, David sat at the kitchen table, swiping his bank card over and over at the online checkout screen. The laptop pinged each time with the same denial. Transaction declined. His forehead furrowed, his lips curled. What the hell? He grabbed his phone, dialed the bank, the plastic creaking under his grip. Sharon leaned against the counter, arms crossed, sipping a glass of cheap wine. "What now?" she asked, boredom lacing her voice. "They froze it," David snapped. "The joint account closed." She shut it down. The wine glass paused halfway to Sharon's lips. "You're kidding." His laugh was humorless, sharp. "The old bat thinks she's clever. But she can't hold out forever." He slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing through the house. "She'll slip." She always does. But for the first time, there was no laughter from Sharon. Only silence, heavy and uncertain. The slam of a car door shattered the quiet afternoon. Maggie looked up from the rose bush she was trimming, pruning shears still warm in her palm. David's truck screeched into the driveway, gravel spitting beneath its tires. He didn't bother to kill the engine before storming out, fists clenched, face flushed red from either heat or liquor, likely both. "Ma!" His voice cracked across the yard like a whip. "What the hell did you do?" Maggie straightened, resting the shears on the porch rail. She didn't flinch, though her pulse tightened. "Good evening, David. Don't you play polite with me." He stomped up the steps, the wood groaning under his weight. "My card declined. Twice. You closed the damn account." Her eyes stayed steady, her posture calm as stone. "Yes," she said simply. The word landed harder than any argument. He sputtered, caught between rage and disbelief. "You can't do this. That money's mine too." Maggie tilted her head, the desert light catching the silver in her hair. "Watch me." Sharon appeared at the top of the steps, leaning against the door frame, wine glass dangling carelessly from her fingers. She smirked, her tone sugary but sharp. "This is what happens when you let old people manage money. Senile, paranoid, convinced everyone's out to steal from them." Maggie's hand slipped into her cardigan pocket. Slowly, she drew out the small recorder Frank had pressed on her days earlier. She held it up, thumb hovering over the red button, her gaze never leaving Sharon's face. "Say that again." The smirk faltered for just a beat, but Sharon recovered quickly, swirling the wine with a scoff. "Oh, please. Recording me doesn't change the truth." Emily stood just inside the doorway, half hidden by the shadow of the hall. Her lips pressed tight, but her eyes flickered with something bright. Amusement, even pride. A grin tugged at the corner of her mouth as she caught her grandmother's unshakable stance. David's rage climbed higher, his words spilling faster, messier. "You think this proves something? That deed, that paperwork, none of it matters if you're not fit to handle your own life. You forget things, Ma. You're slipping. Everybody sees it." Maggie didn't rise, didn't yell. She only clicked the recorder on. The red light blinked. David's words flowed into its memory, every insult etched in digital permanence. "You're finished," he spat, jabbing a finger toward her. "You won't see it coming, but I'll make sure a judge hears about this. You'll be stripped of control. Then we'll see whose house this really is." The cicadas whirred louder in the mesquite trees, their chorus filling the silence that followed. Maggie slipped the recorder back into her pocket, the faintest smile ghosting her lips. "Your threats sound the same as your laughter," she said evenly. "Hollow." Sharon muttered something under her breath, retreating into the house with her glass. Emily lingered, meeting Maggie's eyes for just a second. That grin was there again, small, secret, but full of quiet fire. David stomped back down the steps, yanking his keys from his pocket. "This isn't over," he growled. "I'll fix it my way." The truck roared to life, exhaust clouding the air with acrid fumes. Maggie stood at the edge of her porch, hand brushing the worn wood rail, watching him drive off in a fury. Dust trailed behind him, a brown cloud swallowing the street. Inside the cab, David gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. His mind spun, not on groceries or bills, but on power. The only way to beat her now wasn't with shouting or fists against locked doors. It was through the court system, through paperwork, through stripping her rights the way she had stripped his. By the time he turned onto Speedway Boulevard, he had already decided. Tomorrow he would file a petition for power of attorney. If she wanted to play with signatures, he'd bury her in them. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnished wood and recycled air. The hum of an overhead vent, the only sound before the clerk called the case. Maggie sat at the petitioner's table, back straight, her cardigan buttoned despite the heat of Tucson outside. The manila folder rested neatly in front of her, papers clipped, notes highlighted. She had come armed not with rage, but with order. Across the aisle, David slouched in his chair, jaw tight, eyes flicking between the judge and his mother. His suit jacket looked borrowed, the sleeves a fraction too long. Sharon whispered in his ear, her voice sharp enough to carry across the polished wood floor. He smirked at Maggie, but it was thin, strained. The judge adjusted his glasses. Mr. Doyle, you filed a petition for power of attorney, claiming your mother is no longer competent to manage her affairs. This court will determine that today his voice was even, but Maggie caught the faint edge of weariness, as though he'd seen too many families torn apart over control. The first witness was the court-appointed doctor, a man in his 50s with calm eyes and a tidy stack of charts. He spoke steadily, flipping through his notes. Mrs. Doyle completed the competency evaluation last week. Memory tests, cognitive assessments, financial management scenarios. He glanced up. She passed each with precision. Her recall is intact, her judgment sound. Frankly, she performed better than many decades younger. Maggie kept her gaze on the table, but her mouth curved slightly. The questions had been almost laughable. The date, the president's name, balancing a pretend checkbook. She had done it all without hesitation, then recited her monthly expenses by heart. David slammed his palm against the table. She rehearsed it. She's hiding how bad she really is. His voice cracked, echoing through the chamber. The judge frowned. You'll have your turn, Mr. Doyle. Sit down. When it was Maggie's turn, she rose without needing help. She spoke clearly, her voice steady. I've managed my home for 40 years. I paid off a mortgage. I carried my family after my husband passed. And I still balance my accounts every month. The only thing I've forgotten lately is why I let my son treat me like a stranger in my own house. A murmur rippled across the courtroom benches. The judge nodded once, then gestured toward the witness stand. Emily Doyle. Emily walked forward, hands twisting nervously, but her voice steadied as she took her oath. She avoided her father's glare and focused on the judge. He locked her out, she said simply. I was there. He shut the door and told her to beg to come back inside. My grandmother didn't forget. She didn't get confused. He wanted to humiliate her. David shot to his feet. Liar! Sharon grabbed his arm, hissing for him to sit down, but his face was blotched red, his fists trembling. The judge's gavel struck once. Enough. That is not caregiving, Mr. Doyle. That is abuse. His voice carried finality, no room for argument. Silence fell heavy over the courtroom. Maggie sat calmly, hands folded, her gaze on the judge but her mind steady on the recorder in her pocket. The proof she hadn't even needed today. The judge shuffled his papers, then spoke firmly. Mrs. Doyle is competent. Mr. Doyle, your petition is denied. Furthermore, given the testimony and conduct presented, I am granting Mrs. Doyle a protective restraining order. You will not come near her residence or finances without court approval. David staggered back into his chair, eyes wide as though the ground had tilted beneath him. Sharon leaned away, her lips pursed, her wine-sweetened breath no longer enough to shield him. Maggie let her breath out slowly, steady as the desert wind at dusk. She hadn't just defended herself. She'd built a wall the law itself would now enforce. And outside the courthouse, the locks were already waiting. The whine of an electric drill pierced the afternoon stillness as Frank drove another screw into the new deadbolt. Metal shavings glittered against the stucco porch, catching the Arizona sun before the wind swept them away. Maggie stood just behind him, her arms folded, the scent of hot dust rising from the driveway, mixing with the sharper tang of oiled steel. Every grind of the drill sounded like punctuation. An ending, a ceiling, a barrier placed. You'll have more locks than a bank vault by the time I'm done, Frank muttered, tugging at the handle to test its bite. The door didn't budge. He nodded with satisfaction. Solid. Nobody's breaking through that without an invitation. Maggie touched the cool brass with her fingertips, the surface still smudged with his fingerprints. Good. I only want those who respect this house crossing that threshold inside. The smell of fresh wiring filled the living room. A younger tech from Frank's crew was perched on a ladder, threading a small camera into the corner ceiling. Its red light blinked once, then steadied, watching silently. All entries covered, he reported. Motion alerts, cloud feed. You'll see who's here before they even ring the bell. Maggie's eyes tracked the lens, her reflection caught faintly in its dome. For the first time in weeks, she felt the house belonged to her again, not just in law, but in presence. By late afternoon, the work was done. Shiny new keys rested in her palm, weighty and unfamiliar, promising safety in their unfamiliar grooves. She handed one to Emily, who twirled it between her fingers before slipping it onto a chain around her neck. "Grandma's house is hers again," Emily whispered, almost reverent. The words landed with a warmth Maggie hadn't expected. She closed Emily's hand gently over the key. "And yours someday if you guard it wisely." The sound of tires crunching gravel cut through the moment. Sharon's SUV swung sharply into the driveway, sunlight bouncing off its windshield. She climbed out, heels clicking across the concrete, her hair pinned perfectly in place despite the heat. Without so much as a glance at Maggie, she strode to the door and jammed her key into the lock. The metal resisted. She twisted harder, rattling the knob, her composure slipping. "What?" Frank leaned casually against the porch rail, arms crossed, a grin tugging his mouth. "Changed every lock this morning." Sharon shot him a glare before spinning toward Maggie. "You can't do this." Maggie stepped forward, her tone calm, almost polite. "Your keys are useless now." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The simple truth hung in the hot air like a verdict. Sharon's lips trembled, caught between outrage and disbelief. Emily, standing just inside the threshold, watched her father's wife claw at the knob with growing frustration. "It's over," Emily said softly. "You don't belong here anymore." Sharon froze, eyes cutting toward the girl, but Emily didn't back down. For the first time, the teenager's words carried weight that silenced even Sharon's barbs. From the driveway, Laura Briggs approached, briefcase in hand, her steps measured, heels clicking across the pavement. She looked directly at Sharon, then back at Maggie. "Paperwork's airtight," she said evenly. "Ownership, protection orders, revised will. Nothing they do gets them back inside this house." Maggie let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Between Frank's locks, the cameras, and Laura's documents, her fortress was sealed. Brick, bolt, and law. Sharon tossed her useless key onto the ground, metal clinking against the concrete before she stomped back to her SUV. Gravel sprayed as she reversed sharply, disappearing in a trail of dust. The evening settled quiet around them, cicadas droning in the mesquite trees. Maggie lingered at the doorway, fingers brushing the new brass knob. For the first time in months, stepping inside didn't feel like crossing enemy territory. But across town, David sat hunched at his kitchen table, the glow of his phone screen lighting his face. A knock rattled the door. When he opened it, a man in a tan blazer handed him a thick envelope, muttering, "Summons." "Financial exploitation." David tore it open, eyes scanning the first page, his face drained of color. The court was no longer just a threat. It was coming for him. The courthouse buzzed with the muffled drone of voices and the shuffle of papers. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, washing everything in a sterile glow. Maggie sat at the long oak table, shoulders squared, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of a manila folder as though it were a shield. She could feel the weight of years in the grooves of the wood, but she didn't tremble. Across the aisle, David leaned back in his chair, smirk fixed tight like armor. He wore a navy suit that sagged slightly at the shoulders, a necktie knotted too loose. His knee bounced under the table, jittering with barely contained anger. Sharon sat beside him, chin high, her lips painted in a shade too bright for the solemn room. She avoided eye contact with Maggie, but the curl of her mouth betrayed a cruel satisfaction, at least for now. The judge entered, robes sweeping, and the room hushed. "This hearing concerns allegations of financial exploitation and undue influence." His voice echoed, clipped, and final. "Evidence will be presented. Witnesses will be heard. I expect a quorum." His gaze flicked toward David, who quickly stilled his bouncing leg. Laura Briggs rose first, her voice calm and precise. She clicked the recorder Maggie had carried. For weeks, and the courtroom filled with Sharon's cutting laughter, Soon you'll be in a nursing home. Then David's slurred demand followed. Cruel and undeniable. Beg me back in, old woman. Gasps rippled through the benches. The sound of it, captured raw and merciless, carried more weight than any speech Maggie could give. Laura didn't pause. She spread credit card statements across the table. Receipts with David's signature sprawled across liquor store slips and casino withdrawals. This is not caregiving, she said. This is exploitation. Mrs. Doyle's finances were targeted. Her dignity attacked. Her security threatened. Maggie sat still, her face unreadable, though her pulse beat steady in her throat. Next came Emily. The girl walked carefully to the stand, her voice wavering only at first. He locked her out. I saw it. He told her to beg. She swallowed hard, then looked directly at the judge. My grandmother doesn't forget things. My dad just wanted power. David shot up from his chair. She's a child. She doesn't know what she's saying, his voice thundered, drawing the bailiff's step forward. The judge's gavel cracked against wood. Mr. Doyle, you will sit. His tone dropped to ice. Laura slid the final piece across the table. Maggie's updated will, her name gleamed in fresh ink. This document ensures Mr. Doyle gains nothing from his mother's estate, and it carries a no-contest clause. He can file endless motions, but he will never undo this. The judge studied the papers, his jaw tight. His gaze lifted, pinning David. You laughed while locking your mother out of her home. You drained funds meant for her stability. That is not the action of a son. That is the action of a predator. David's face contorted, rage spilling unchecked. He lunged to his feet, words spewing. She's lying. She's poisoning Emily against me. You can't just erase me. Until two bailiffs stepped in, gripping his arms and forcing him back down. His voice cracked into a desperate roar, echoing against the marble walls, before it was drowned in the shuffle of authority. Sharon didn't follow. She stood slowly, gathering her purse with trembling fingers. For the first time, her smirk faltered. With eyes fixed anywhere but David, she slipped out the side door, heels clicking fast against tile. Her exit was quieter than his shouting, but far more devastating. The judge's voice carried above the chaos. This court finds in favor of Margaret Doyle. Effective immediately, David Doyle is permanently disinherited and barred from any claim to her estate. His gavel fell, sharp and final, like a lock snapping shut. Maggie exhaled, shoulders easing back against the chair. She didn't look at David as he cursed, nor at Sharon as she vanished. Her eyes found only Emily's, wide and glistening in the front row. For the first time in years, the house wasn't just hers. Her life was hers, and David's fate had been sealed inside a courtroom, where no key could turn him back in. The gavel's echo still lingered when David erupted. He shoved his chair back so hard it toppled, the scrape of wood against tile cutting through the murmurs of the courtroom. This is a setup, he bellowed, voice cracking under the weight of his fury. She's manipulating all of you. She's too old to even tie her shoes without help. Bailiff stepped forward as he flailed, arms jerking wildly, spit flying with every word. The veins in his neck bulged, his tie hanging loose like a noose. His shouting filled the chamber, but Maggie sat perfectly still at the petitioner's table, her hands folded, her breathing calm. While he raged, she picked up the pen Laura slid across the polished wood. The ink glided smooth as she signed the last page of the trust documents. Her name steady, loops firm. The signature stood in stark contrast to David's chaos, a quiet declaration carved in black. Emily rushed to her side, arms wrapping tight around her shoulders. The girl's voice trembled, but her words were firm. You won, Grandma. You really won. Maggie placed her hand over Emily's, her palm warm, grounding. We did, she whispered, her eyes never leaving the paper she'd just signed. From across the aisle, Sharon gathered her purse with a violent snap. She leaned close as she passed, her perfume sharp and cloying, her voice low and poisonous. This isn't over. Maggie didn't blink. She angled her chin, her reply calm as a door swinging shut. It already is. Laura leaned down, her voice meant only for Maggie. With this trust finalized, your assets are protected. Not just today, permanently. They can shout, threaten, sue, it won't matter. The house, the accounts, everything. They're locked down. Maggie nodded once, her focus not on David's shouting, but on the simple fact that the pen lay still in her hand. Its work complete. The judge ordered the bailiffs to remove David. He jerked free of their grasp once, his voice booming down the hallway as he was forced out. She'll regret this. All of you will. The doors banged shut behind him, muffling his curses into a dull roar. Silence returned to the courtroom. Papers rustled, heels clicked faintly across tile, but Maggie felt as though a great weight had been lifted from her chest. She rose slowly, her hand never leaving Emily's. Together they walked out of the chamber. Laura close behind, her briefcase snapping shut with a lawyer's satisfaction. In the hallway, the air smelled faintly of floor polish and old stone. The hum of fluorescent lights above steady and unchanging. For the first time in months, Maggie's steps did not falter. Outside, the desert sun was blinding. Reporters loitered on the courthouse steps, microphones poised, their voices sharp with questions, but Laura guided Maggie past them with a firm hand. No statements today. Let the papers speak for themselves. Emily clutched the folder of signed trust documents to her chest, her grip protective, as though it were treasure. It's over, she whispered again, though her tone carried awe rather than certainty. Maggie allowed herself the faintest of smiles. Over for them, perhaps, but not for David. Because even as the courthouse emptied, word spread faster than dust across the desert. Next morning, the warehouse smelled of diesel and dust. Forklifts beeping in the distance, pallets stacked like miniature skylines. David stormed in late, shirt untucked, face still blotched from the previous night's binge. He slapped his badge against the reader, but the light blinked red. Denied. Systems down, he muttered, jamming it again. Still red. Behind him, his boss appeared, broad-shouldered, jaw set, clipboard in hand. Systems fine, he said. His voice carried the clipped precision of a man who had no time for excuses. You're suspended, Doyle, David froze. Suspended? For what? I've been here 15 years. The boss cut him off, thrusting an envelope into his chest. Court records hit HR yesterday. Financial exploitation charges. Restraining order against your own mother, he shook his head, disgust plain. You stole from her, Doyle. Half the staff's talking about it already. David's mouth opened, closed. His fingers crumpled the envelope. It's not, she's exaggerating. I was helping her. Save it, the boss snapped. Turn in your keys. We'll contact you after the investigation. The stairs burned worse than the heat outside. Workers leaned on forklifts, whispered near loading docks, eyes following him. One muttered loud enough for David to hear. Can you believe it? Stealing from his own mother? Another snorted. Explains why his checks were always late. David's hands shook as he fumbled his badge onto the desk. For the first time, his anger looked like fear. Back at the house, Sharon was already packing. Suitcases lined the bed, clothes shoved inside with careless fury. She didn't look at him when he came in. You knew this would blow up, she snapped, folding blouses with jerky movements. You couldn't keep your mouth shut in court, couldn't keep your hands off her accounts. Now we've got nothing. David dropped into a chair, head in his hands. She ruined me, Sharon whirled, her voice sharp as glass. No, you ruined yourself. She shoved another handful of clothes into the suitcase. And don't expect me to go down with you. Emily sat on the porch steps outside, backpack at her feet. She'd heard every word. When David tried to pass her, she spoke quietly, but with a firmness that stilled him. You brought this on yourself, Dad. Her eyes, usually soft with hesitation, carried the same steady fire Maggie's did. For the first time, David couldn't meet them. A few blocks away, Maggie knelt in her garden, the soil dark beneath her fingernails. The air smelled of damp earth and sun-warmed roses. She clipped a bloom, its petals deep crimson, and placed it gently in a vase. The house behind her stood quiet, secure. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was peace. Frank's boots crunched against gravel as he walked up, a steaming paper cup in hand. "Coffee," he said gruffly, passing it over. Maggie took it, the warmth seeping into her palms. "You didn't have to." "Didn't want to miss this," he replied, leaning against the porch rail. His eyes scanned the yard, the locks, the security cameras glinting in the sun. "Freedom smells good, huh?" Maggie inhaled the mix of roses and strong coffee. "It does." For a moment, neither spoke. The cicadas buzzed in the mesquite trees, the desert air humming with life. But somewhere across town, David sat hunched over the kitchen table, pen scratching across cheap-lined paper. The house was quiet. Sharon gone, Emily silent, the walls echoing with his own breathing. He wrote fast, desperate, words slanting, ink blotting. Apologies, excuses, pleas for one more chance. When he folded the letter, the paper trembled in his hands. He slid it into an envelope and scrawled his mother's name across the front. His lips pressed tight as he sealed it. For the first time in his life, David Doyle wasn't demanding entry. He was begging. The envelope sat on Maggie's kitchen counter, edges wrinkled from a desperate hand. Her name was scrawled across the front in David's jagged handwriting, letters pressed so hard the ink bled. She stared at it for a long while, the ticking of the kitchen clock echoing like a heartbeat in the still air. Finally, she slid a paring knife under the seal and opened it. The paper inside smelled faintly of stale beer and cigarette smoke, as though the vices had seeped into the fibers. The words sprawled uneven, some lines scratched out, others underlined twice. "Ma, I didn't mean it the way it came out. You know I've had a hard run. Sharon turned on me. Emily's against me. The court's not fair. None of this is fair. I just need one more chance. You've forgiven me before. You can again. Don't throw me out like trash. I'm still your son." Maggie's eyes scanned faster, her stomach tightening. "You owe me, Ma. After all the years I stuck around. Who else is going to take care of you when you slip? You're not invincible. You'll need me sooner than you think. No apology. No responsibility. Just a plea wrapped in entitlement. Excuses leaking between every line." She folded the page once, then again, her movements crisp and final. With a single tug, she tore it in half. The rip echoed sharp through the quiet kitchen, a sound more satisfying than any shouted victory. She tore again, quartering the paper, the pieces fluttering to the counter like brittle leaves. Emily walked in from the hallway, headphones hanging loose around her neck. She saw the scraps, scattered across the counter, and picked up one jagged piece. Her father's handwriting was unmistakable. She looked at Maggie, her voice steady. "That's the only answer he deserves." Maggie met her granddaughter's eyes. "Yes," she said softly, brushing the scraps into her palm. "It is." Later that afternoon, Laura dropped by to check the latest filings. She set her briefcase on the table, the leather creaking as she unclasped it. Maggie showed her the torn letter without saying a word. Laura skimmed a fragment, the corners of her mouth tightening. "Excuses," she muttered. "Classic. He'll keep pushing until he finds a crack." She folded the scraps back together, then looked Maggie in the eye. "Stay the course." "That's all you have to do now." Maggie rose, carrying the pieces to the sink. The metal basin was cool beneath her hands as she set them down. She struck a match, the sulfur scent sharp in her nose, and touched it to the paper. Flames curled the edges, turning David's words into black ash. The smoke rose, acrid and bitter, before disappearing into the vent above the stove. Emily watched from the doorway. There was no grief in her eyes, only relief, as though the fire consumed more than paper. The house grew quiet again, filled only with the faint crackle of the last burning scrap. Maggie rinsed the sink, washing the ashes away, until nothing remained but clean steel and silence. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. No son's voice in her ear, no threats hanging over her head. Just the low hum of the refrigerator, the faint smell of roses drifting in from the garden, and Emily's steady presence nearby. The phone rang, its sharp trill cut through the peace, startling both women. Maggie wiped her hands on a dish towel and picked up the receiver. "Mrs. Doyle," a woman's voice asked briskly. "This is Janice Whitman with the Arizona Daily Tribune. We'd like to run a feature on you. Your case, your fight. Elder justice is a growing issue, and you're the face of it now. How soon can we schedule an interview?" Maggie's grip tightened on the receiver, her eyes narrowing with both caution and curiosity. She hadn't expected her private war to spill into the public eye. And for the first time, she wondered if her battle with David was no longer just about her. The newspaper hit Maggie's doorstep just after dawn, the thud startling her from the half-silence of the morning. She bent to pick it up, the Tucson air already warming with the promise of heat, and froze when she saw her own face staring back at her. The front page carried the headline in bold black letters, "Mother outsmarts son who locked her out." Beneath it, a photograph captured her leaving the courthouse. Shoulders straight, chin firm, Emily at her side, clutching the folder of signed documents. For a moment, Maggie only stared, her reflection merging with the glossy print. She had never been on the front page of Palki, anything in her 71 years. Mail routes, PTA bake sales, retirement dinners. Her life had passed without the world's notice, until now. Inside, Emily rushed in from the kitchen, crumbs from her cereal still clinging to her shirt. "Grandma!" she exclaimed, snatching the paper. Her eyes raced across the headline. "They actually did it! They put you on the front page!" Her voice cracked between awe and pride. Maggie let her granddaughter soak it in, the way young eyes needed heroes to be close enough to touch. Emily's face glowed as she whispered, "Everyone's going to know what you did. That you didn't let him win." The article unfolded in sharp, decisive lines. It detailed David's attempt to seize power, his humiliation in court, and Maggie's unwavering stand. It quoted Laura. "This case is proof that seniors are not helpless. They are capable, and they deserve the law's protection." By the time she reached the end, Maggie's hands had stilled. She read the final sentence twice. "Margaret Doyle has become a symbol of resilience for older Americans, fighting exploitation." The phone rang. Frank's gravelly voice carried through the line, gruff but tinged with pride. "Picked up 3 copies already," he said. "Figure you'll want one for the scrapbook, one for the fridge, and one for the frame." She could hear the rattle of his van tools in the background. "Not every day you make headlines, Maggie." She chuckled softly, the sound rusty but genuine. "I never wanted to." "Doesn't matter what you wanted. You earned it," he paused. "This isn't just about locks anymore. It's about proof nobody can ignore." Later that afternoon, Laura stopped by with a crisp folder under her arm. The office air clung to her blazer, a faint smell of ink and leather following her. She laid the newspaper carefully on the table, smoothing the crease with her palm. "Your legacy's sealed now," she said. "This story protects you as much as the trust does. It makes you untouchable. Any challenge your son tries from here will look like spite." Maggie studied the print again, tracing her name with one finger. "And his is erased," she murmured. Laura's gaze softened, but her voice stayed matter-of-fact. "He'll see this everywhere he goes. At gas stations, at grocery stores, on his neighbors' porches. That humiliation carries more weight than any lock," Emily beamed, holding the clipping close as though it were a trophy. She folded it carefully and slipped it into her backpack, a quiet act of preservation. "I'm going to show my civics teacher," she said, almost shy. "They should use this story in class." The day passed in a quiet rhythm. Neighbors dropped by, some with congratulations, others with casseroles, gestures of solidarity, of whispered admiration. For once, Maggie didn't feel like a woman merely surviving behind new locks. She felt like someone whose voice had reached beyond her own walls. But across town, David read the same article with a scowl that twisted into rage. He tore the paper in half, then in quarters, until his living room floor was littered with his mother's face. Sharon watched from the kitchen doorway, her lips tight, her arms folded. By evening, she was packing again. Her movements were brisk, no wasted steps, each drawer emptied with finality. David barked at her, demanded to know what she was doing, but her reply was cold, stripped of venom. "I'm done, David," she said, zipping the last suitcase. "You're poison. And I'm not going down with you." He gaped, momentarily silenced. Sharon wheeled her suitcase to the door, heels clicking on the tile. She didn't look back when she opened it. The only sound left behind was the hollow slam of wood against frame. The article had crowned Maggie as a survivor. For David, it had written a different ending, abandoned not just by the law, but by the wife who once laughed at his cruelty. The first thing Maggie noticed was the quiet, not the tense silence of a locked door, but a softer hush, filled only with the chirp of sparrows and the rustle of the desert wind. The house, once echoing with David's shouts and Sharon's cutting laughter, felt lighter, as though the walls themselves had exhaled. She had painted them fresh, warm adobe tones to replace the chipped white. The scent of new paint lingered faintly in the hallways, mingling with the lemon cleaner she'd scrubbed into every corner. Gone were the scuffs David had left on the baseboards, the stains from Sharon's wine. In their place, a home remade. Emily's laughter carried down the hall, clear and unburdened. She had moved in full time now, her clothes folded neatly in the room that once belonged to her father. The girl had pinned postcards above her desk, mountains, oceans, places she swore she'd travel after college. Her presence filled the house not with noise, but with life. On the porch, Frank adjusted the new light fixture he'd brought over. The bulb glowed bright against the evening sky, replacing the old one that had flickered for years. "There," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Porch'll shine like a lighthouse now." "Nobody sneaks up without you seeing," Maggie smiled, handing him a glass of iced tea. The glass sweated in the desert heat, beads of condensation slipping over her knuckles. "You didn't have to," Frank shrugged, his voice rough but kind. "Didn't feel right leaving it half-finished. Besides, you've had enough darkness." Inside, Laura spread fresh documents across the kitchen table, her reading glasses perched on her nose. The papers smelled faintly of toner, their edges crisp. She tapped each section with her pen. Trust finalized, title secured, end-of-life directives updated. Everything is airtight now. If David tries so much as a phone call, it won't touch you. Maggie read each page slowly, her eyes steady. No panic, no rush, just confirmation. When she set her signature at the bottom, the scratch of ink sounded less like defense and more like closure. The days unfolded with rhythm again. Morning coffee on the porch, afternoons tending the roses, the rich scent of blossoms mingling with desert dust. Her hands sank into soil darkened with water, each thorn carefully avoided, each bloom coaxed gently upright. The garden, once neglected in the shadow of turmoil, thrived under her care. Emily often joined her, kneeling beside the flower beds, dirt smudging her fingertips. "They're stronger than they look," she said once, brushing a petal. "So are we," Maggie replied, and they both smiled. Evenings brought stillness. Maggie sat on the porch swing, its chains creaking gently as she swayed. The air cooled just enough to carry the faint fragrance of roses, mingling with the sharp desert sage. Emily sat beside her sometimes, head against her shoulder, scrolling on her phone or sketching in a notebook. Other times, Maggie sat alone, listening to the crickets, the hum of the new porch light above her, the steady thrum of safety. Frank stopped by often, sometimes with coffee, sometimes just to lean against the rail and watch the sun sink into the horizon. He didn't fill the air with words he didn't need. His presence was steady enough. Laura visited less frequently now that the paperwork was done, but when she did, she always remarked, "You look younger every time I see you." Maggie would laugh softly, though she knew it wasn't youth, just peace. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in strokes of violet and gold, Emily slipped outside with something hidden behind her back. Her grin gave her away. "What's this mischief?" Maggie asked, rocking gently on the swing. Emily pulled the object forward, a framed document, glass gleaming in the porch light. Inside was the house deed, Maggie's name etched in bold letters, preserved as though it were a family crest. Maggie's breath caught. Her hand reached out, fingertips brushing the glass. The weight of it was more than wood and paper. It was every step she'd taken, every lock she'd turned, every silence she had held until it became power. Emily set it gently in her lap. "This belongs where it's safe," she said, her voice soft but certain. Maggie looked at her granddaughter, then at the house glowing behind them, secure and alive. Her chest rose with a long, steady breath. For the first time in years, she felt no shadows pressing at her door. But the deed in her lap wasn't just a symbol of peace. It was the reminder of a battle won, and of a son left outside its walls. The framed document rested heavy in Emily's hands as she carried it down the hall. The glass caught the evening light, reflecting streaks of amber across the freshly painted walls. Maggie followed behind her granddaughter, her steps steady, though her heart thrummed like a distant drum. "This belongs where it's safe," Emily said, pausing at the center of the hallway. Her voice carried no hesitation. She lifted the frame and hung it on the wall between two family photographs. One of Maggie as a young postal worker in her navy blue uniform, another of her late husband smiling beside a mailbox they once installed together. Now, the deed joined them, the true emblem of her life's work. Maggie stepped closer, her fingertips grazing the glass. The surface was cool beneath her skin, but the sight of her name, Margaret Doyle, etched bold and final, warmed her to the core. For months her identity had been mocked, questioned, dismissed by her own son, yet here it stood, preserved under glass, undeniable. She smiled, a quiet curve of the lips, not triumphant but grounded. The kind of smile that comes when storms finally pass. Frank leaned against the doorway, the porch light's glow outlining his frame. His voice was rough, yet softened with something close to pride. "That's better than any lock I've ever put in." Maggie turned, amusement sparking in her eyes. "And you've put in more than a few." "Sure have," Frank said with a grunt, pushing his cap back. "But paper like that? You can't pick it, can't pry it." That's forever from the kitchen. The scent of Laura's herbal tea drifted into the hall. She'd stopped by to finalize the last set of documents, her blazer draped neatly over the chair, her briefcase closed for once. She joined them now, her heels clicking softly on the tile. She studied the frame, her lawyer's eye assessing even as her expression softened. "Ironclad," Laura said. "Untouchable. No contest clause makes it unbreakable. The trust locks it down, and the publicity, well, no judge in the state would dare overturn it now." She glanced at Maggie. "Your house isn't just secure. Your legacy is." Maggie's gaze lingered on the glass, her reflection faint in its surface. "He begged me once," she said quietly, the words tasting of both steel and sorrow. "Now he begs the world." Emily slipped her arm through Maggie's, resting her head briefly against her shoulder. The girl's eyes shone, not with tears, but with pride. She had seen her father fall, but more importantly, she had seen her grandmother rise. The house settled into its evening rhythm. Outside, the cicadas droned their endless song. The roses by the porch swayed in the desert breeze, their fragrance drifting faintly through the open window. The air was warm, but not heavy, the kind of warmth that held comfort instead of suffocation. Later, Maggie sat on the porch swing, the chains creaking gently as she rocked. Emily sat beside her, sketchbook in her lap, shading the outline of the framed deed she had just hung. Frank sipped coffee on the porch rail, his gaze scanning the quiet street, while Laura checked her phone but stayed close, as though unwilling to let the evening end. For once, no one raised their voice. No locks clicked in malice. The house glowed in the twilight, a fortress of calm. Maggie leaned back, letting her eyes trace the horizon where the desert swallowed the sun. She thought of the night David had turned the key, the smugness in his voice, the humiliation meant to break her. She thought of how she had set the groceries down, whispered, "Not today," and walked away. Every step since had led her here, to peace, to security, to proof carved in law and paper. Her fingers brushed Emily's knuckles, a simple gesture of continuity. The girl looked up, smiling, as if sensing the unspoken truth between them. Maggie's voice was calm, steady, each word a lock sliding shut for good. My son locked the door and said, "Beg me back in," so I changed every lock and left him on the street. The porch fell into silence, the words settling like stone, and for the first time, Maggie felt the house breathe with her.